I'm going to come to you first, Hugh. Could you tell us a little bit about the unprecedented challenge that you and your business faced and kind of how you approached it?
Yeah, sure. So Gumtree, I guess, is a brand, a business that most people, I think, are familiar with. We're lucky enough to have pretty high brand awareness. We've been around for about 20 years. I guess the challenge we faced in recent years is twofold in some ways. With COVID, of course, as a backdrop, we're a face-to-face trading community, so obviously COVID had an impact on that. But the true challenge we faced was primarily two sales processes and then a massive carve-out and stand-up exercise. The kind of history of events is Gumtree was owned by eBay for 15 years. 3 years ago in 2020, eBay was selling Gumtree and all of its classifieds businesses to another classifieds global business called Adevinta. Gumtree was part of that sale, about a $10 billion transaction. As part of that transaction, the CMA in the UK blocked the transaction on the grounds that eBay would still be a minority holder in this new business, Adevinta, and so by owning eBay Marketplace, a minority shareholding at Gumtree, and then through this transaction, Shpock in the UK would have too much control of local marketplace trading. The transaction was blocked on only allowed to proceed on the grounds that Gumtree was sold and also Shpock was sold. So Shpock was sold immediately. Gumtree, then we entered a period of 6 months where we were passed over to Adevinta, and Adevinta said, well, we need to sell you. So we stood on our own, waiting to be sold for 6 months. And then we were sold to private equity and effectively given 12 months, in some cases 18 months, to completely stand up our business. And that means building finance teams, legal teams, HR teams, everything which had been provided by eBay before, from a standing start doing this, and also migrating our entire tech stack. As you can imagine, 15 years as part of eBay, our website was hosted on eBay servers, our data warehouse was an eBay data warehouse, our data team was based in Shanghai. All of this we had to build from scratch. We had to do this with tight deadlines. We had to do this while COVID was happening. So we weren't in the office. We were trying to understand how that worked. We had to do this while people were transparently leaving the company. We'd gone from being part of eBay and suddenly private equity owned. That's not for everyone, so people were leaving. We had to do this with almost no external support. Suddenly we had to take these huge projects on ourselves, and we had incredibly tight deadlines around this. So that was what faced us. We had about 18 months, huge challenges as we went through it, and of course some spillover afterwards, as you can imagine. But of course we're in a great position now on that, and as we talk through today, we can talk about some of the approaches we took, but that maybe sets the context of the challenge and the war we were facing.
And Rada, love to hear about what you went through at Flashback, because it's quite a story.
Yeah, sure. I mean, a bit different, but also I really resonated with a lot of stuff that Hugh had just said. So we effectively started in 2016, and we were a bootstrapped company. We bootstrapped to 20 million turnover. We had staff of 70 in London. We were just about to do a big Series A. We were being inundated with offers from VCs on both sides of the Atlantic, from US and UK. And we could see kind of COVID coming, from January onwards. And we said, right, let's just get this raise done. We had 4 offers on the table. And then on March the 13th, it was Friday, March the 13th at 5 p.m, Trump closed the borders. And that was it. That was the beginning of the end of our company. Obviously, all the VC deals fell through. We hadn't completed in time. We had 95% of our revenue just dropped overnight. It was gone. We had customers stranded in Morocco, in Sri Lanka, in Costa Rica. We had customers walking to the border through the desert in Morocco, trying to get on planes back home. We had customers who didn't want to come home, who thought we were exaggerating the whole situation. It was absolute chaos. As you can imagine, the phones were ringing off the hook. Every customer was asking for a refund. We had to repatriate customers, and we didn't know what was going to happen. And all of a sudden, going from high growth, making hay while the sun was shining, felt like we were invincible. Overnight, we went into crisis mode, and I had to go from being very much a peacetime CEO, that's all I knew, to being a wartime CEO and actually creating a war room to deal with this crisis. That would, just to give you a bit more context, we tried to survive over 6 months. We had no investors. We were completely bootstrapped, and we'd only been running for 4 years, so we didn't have massive cash reserves, as you can imagine. We tried to survive for about 6 months on the promise that we were going to be the first nation to bring out a vaccine. If you remember, Boris was kind of promising a vaccine for July, August. We realised no vaccine was coming, and that actually, we weren't going to get investment. We weren't going to be able to sell the company. The entire industry was on the brink of collapse at that point. So we felt like we had to do our fiduciary duty as directors to put the business into administration, which we did on the 4th of November 2020. As part of that process, the assets were put up for sale, and the administrator said to us, well, you can bid on the assets if you like. And we felt like we should give it the last roll of the dice, because it was an amazing business before COVID, and we felt like it could be amazing business again. But we had no personal runway. We were on founders' salaries. I mean, we were on the brink of kind of personal bankruptcy. Our entire net worth as founders was in Flashpack, but we remortgaged our house and we borrowed money from friends and family, and we bid on the assets. And then after some excruciating weeks, we found out we were the highest bidders, and we had got our baby back effectively, but we were back at the bottom of the mountain. It was Lee, the co-founder, and my husband and I in the same flat in Brooklyn, with no staff, and we had to relaunch the business again with no funding, and we did just that kind of a year later.
And we're going to come back to how you got through this period, because I know that Flashback is now doing amazingly well again. So it is possible to come back from the brink. And Catherine, if you can hear us and if we can hear you, would be great to hear about what you went through at Pearl and Dean, because I know that COVID, similarly with the cinema industry, cut you off at the knees a little bit.
Yeah, well, we just basically closed overnight. That was it. All of our business was gone, films gone, no audiences. So we were very lucky. We've got a strand that we've been developing for a while, which is outdoor cinema, because never underestimate the British public's willingness to sit in the rain and watch Dirty Dancing for the 50 millionth time in a park. But we converted that with our partners into drive-ins, so we did have some money coming in. But fundamentally, we were gone, and no one knew when we were going to open, and for about 15 months it was really peripatetic, and trying to, in a really, really kind of complex media world, keep going, cinema's just gone on holiday for a bit, we'll be back, was hard. Almost as hard as being in Wigan, where there is no Wi-Fi, but but there will be a very beautiful cinema here, and I can only apologise for the fact that I keep dropping that, and lorries are walking, and lorries are backing up and delivering popcorn.
Now, well, you have got all this experience with dealing with adversity, so we have no worries about you sticking with us.
I've got nice balloons.
There you go.
I get balloons. Yeah.
Beautiful balloons. I've noticed we've got a question already. Just to let everybody know, we will have a little question section at the end for the last 10-15 minutes. So if you do have questions, please pop them in the question box. But first, I'm going to stick with you, Catherine. Hopefully we haven't lost you. And talk about once crisis has hit, how are the best ways as CEO to communicate that with your business and with the kind of wider community?
I think for your team, the best thing is to say, I'm trying to find an answer, but I don't have the answer, because it is that thing where you suddenly feel the burden. Everyone in the room looks at you and goes, well, what's the answer? And we're all brought up to think that CEOs are, hand down special powers and we know everything, and we don't. But
we may have lost her there.
You might emerge in a different form, but you will get through it. And I think that for our point of view, we just said we're a really strong team. We've got a really great ethic. We will come back again. This is too important a business for people just to, in terms of cinema and films, for people to abandon it. And it's just going to be tough for a bit. And we made the decision not to make anybody redundant. So everyone in the senior management team took a 40% pay cut for 16 months. So we didn't make anybody redundant. And we just made sure that everyone could cover their mortgages. We put people on furlough. But it is the thing where you have to don't go, it'll all be fine in 6 months' time, because you don't know. You've got to be realistic, coupled with optimistic, I think, is the key thing. And also just say, we don't know what the answer is. And but we'll work it through together. And actually, one of the things that we found the most interesting was we got people, because that's so much more time, to look at all the things we could do when we came back that we do differently. So we use people, to do brainstorms and what have you that they'd never have time for. And I think people felt involved. That was the key thing, actually, was not for people not to feel they'd been let adrift, and that no one really bothered. So we still had a meeting every Monday where people could turn up to or not turn up to. Mostly we just chatted rubbish to each other, but at least it felt people felt they could turn up.
And Hugh, you mentioned that you did have some of those people leaving the business when you were going through this period of upheaval. How did you communicate around that, I guess, and what advice would you have?
Yeah, I mean, the comms, what Catherine's just said there that really resonated is, realistic and optimistic, right? That number one was being transparent and honest with everyone. I think especially in times of crisis, people get, hopefully, it's one-offs, it's not BAU, so it's new to you as well as leaders, and you're doing your best, and you're making the decisions, the informed decisions that you can to move forward. But as part of that, it's really important to be super clear and direct with people as well when there is things happening that they may not be aware of, or in our case, when there are deadlines, those are very real. They're not open for negotiations. They are just a fact, and making that clear to people helps people then understand, I think, some of the decisions you're making. But we really lent into, I guess, and touching, I suppose, on how we reacted to people leaving the company, etc., was to lean into what this new world for us was. And yes, it's not eBay. Yes, it's not a US, Silicon Valley tech business, but what it is an independent, business, and the opportunity that comes with that is, we own our own decisions, we own, our own strategy, something which is very different to what it was before, and that's super exciting. And what we always tried to focus on was balancing our comms between the here and now and the longer term. The here and now, of course, we're in this moment, but let's not let that consume us. It's a little bit different to the COVID point. There's a here and now. There's an end to it. But let's think about what happens afterwards. And let's always have that in our mind, because there is an end point to this. And yes, it's incredibly difficult. Yes, we're asking people to work incredibly hard, but it's not the norm. It's an end point. And afterwards, there's huge opportunities for us. The final thing, again, which Catherine touched on, which is, I think, super important, is in being honest that and hearing and listening for feedback also. And this is something we pushed a lot as part of our new culture in terms of we're making decisions, informed decisions about how to deal with this. But like with anything in a product, when you do it, your users here, our team of employees, let's hear if it's working or not. Of course, you need the maturity in the organization that not everything will be acted on. But if we're genuinely listening and trying to react and hear what people are saying, what's working or not, and taking action, I think that, again, really helped us as we worked through to get the support from the teams. And that can be done through, groups, feedback forms, one-on-ones. But again, ultimately, it's, I think, approachable leadership, which comes back to honesty and people knowing that they can talk to us and we will listen and take it on board. So that's kind of how we try to approach the different comms threads.
Hugh, can I ask a question, which is, do you think there's a change of leadership, and Rudder as well, that change of leadership we've had to do post-COVID because we didn't have the answer and we didn't know, just from my point of view?
So one thing for us, and maybe I'm answering, maybe I'm not, but during our period that we're talking about here, we definitely changed how we ran our organization and how we approached it as leaders. So typically, as an organization, country, broadly agile focused, outcome focused, and giving autonomy to teams to make decisions and drive forward towards that. During this period, we shifted heavily towards task focused and outcome focused, and driving very clearly this is what needs to be done, and ultimately taking more direct decisions as leadership, informed decisions, but much more control over that. That's something we then shifted away from again, but it was certainly a different style of business and how we ran it during this period. That was our experience in Gumtree, but it was needed. I think certain times require different styles of organizational decision making and leadership. I don't know, pass to you, Red.
Yeah, I created a war room immediately where I was communicating with my leadership team every hour, on the hour, giving instructions about what to do. I just moved. I was a very collaborative leader. You know, everyone always had an opinion, did things by consensus. And suddenly, literally within half an hour, I realized I just had to take command and control. And that's what the entire team wanted. They just wanted to be told what to do because it was just absolute chaos. And that's what I did. You know, hour by hour, I gave instructions. I took advice from the team, but then I made the decision on absolutely everything for the first 24 to 48 hours. Then after that, we kind of moved to like a daily communication update with the entire team. And then eventually, as kind of months and months went on, you know, it was with the entire team, it was kind of weekly, and we did similar things to Catherine. Like, we just made sure the entire team was on furlough, except what we called a lights on team, who had to deal with customer complaints and repatriation stuff. We had a weekly team with the entire weekly meeting with the entire team to make sure everyone still felt like a part of the company, that they weren't being forgotten. But ultimately, I moved directly to that command and control model for the duration of the 6 that we were trying to survive, essentially. And I think everyone appreciated that, right? Everyone wants you to lead from the front. They're looking at you for answers. We're an inherently transparent company, so we were very transparent with our team, but I was also conscious of protecting them somewhat from the roller coaster, right? Because my mental health was completely attached to the news every day to see if the government, Boris, was going to give the travel industry a care package. And every day I was just hoping for that, praying for that. So my mental health was just up and down every single day. And I knew that I had to protect my team from that, right? And that's your duty as a leader, that they're not being transparent but also protecting, and I was very conscious of that balance. But I also didn't want to give them false hope, because I knew very, very early on that it's very unlikely we're going to find funding. It's very unlikely we're going to sell the business, and if it happens, it's a miracle, right? So I tried to keep everyone on furlough for as long as possible to try and find other opportunities. But everyone loved the company. They loved working for Flashback. So lots of people wanted to hang on and support Lee and I just didn't want to give them false hope. So there was a part of me had to, you know, be really honest and just say, look, the chances of us surviving are very slim here. So you need to do what's right for you. And we don't expect you to kind of be loyal in these situations. Like, these are very, very difficult times. I think the other thing is that we took the approach of being very transparent with all of our stakeholders. So we didn't bury our heads. We were always communicating with our stakeholders. Before we went into administration, we got on the phone on a video call with all of our suppliers and said, we're going into administration, you will lose money with us, we're really, really, really sorry. And we just faced it, and we dealt with a lot of anger, you know, obviously a lot of emotion, right? Everyone was in that self-protectionist mode. They had to be, but we faced it head on, which really helped us. So when we relaunched, all of our partners continued working with us because we'd taken that approach of being super transparent and owning up to what was happening.
And you mentioned that you sort of moved to that command and control style of leadership. And when we were talking, running up to this discussion, you brought up the fact that as CEO, everything is your fault. So staying with you just for the moment, rather, but please do jump in, Catherine and Hugh. How do you deal with that loneliness at the top?
Yeah, it was really lonely period. I've got a co-founder who's also my husband, but the problem with that is that when you're in the trenches together, you know, it's difficult to pull each other out of that. And we were also facing kind of personal bankruptcy, and as I said, our entire net worth was in Flashpack, which was about to collapse. So that was extremely stressful. What I did was I found confidence to speak to. They were good friends of mine, also founders, so they completely understood the journey. I felt so sorry for my family, you know, because quite often you don't realize your friends and family go on this journey with you, but they don't understand the details and the nuances of being a founder. So I tried not to burden them more than they were already being burdened, right? So I tried to find founders who I could just speak to. I'm part of an amazing founders network where I could just speak really candidly about what I was going through, the mental health issues. I could cry. They gave me perspective. I had a particular friend who then became an advisor to the business, and he would just give me perspective. You know, when I was in panic mode, I couldn't panic in front of the team, right? You have to put on a strong face in front of the team. I would just go to him and he would just help me kind of sieve through the fog, help me get some perspective, realize that even if the business collapsed, it wouldn't be the end of the world, that I wasn't, you know, I could start again. So that was really important to me, and I would always advise like trying to find those confidants kind of before your business is in crisis, right? People that you can trust, because when you're going through crisis, you become incredibly paranoid. You don't know who to trust. And I did have a few people who were advising me, but that had kind of vested interest in the business, an ulterior kind of interest in the business. So I couldn't completely trust them. I couldn't completely be candid with them. So having a real friend who understands what it's like to run a business in crisis is super important.
Hugh, with Catherine is in crisis at the moment. Coming to you, Hugh, how do you manage the loneliness of being a CEO? Obviously, it's different. The founder journey is very different from when you're brought in to another business. But what are the unique challenges there?
Yeah, there's certainly an element, right, of loneliness in any, let's call it a CEO, or as you become the point person for any organization or business. That's inherent, I think, and everything is around managing and coping with this. I think, of course, external, the mentors, etc., is something to think about. One thing I try and do and think about is from an internal perspective. I guess there's two things. So one is, of course, while you don't have maybe a direct team in the classic sense, but you have your executive, you have your team there. And what I try and do there, and what's really important in terms of that mental health and de-stressing, is, it's kind of cliche, but that trust in those people. And what I mean by that is when you make those decisions, when you talk about as a CEO, you have to make decisions, which not everyone is agreeing with, but having the knowledge that everyone will, fall in line and act and operate with this. And so by its nature, you're going to be anxious by every decision you make. There's always uncertainty. There's always risk. You're always questioning it. But once the decision is made, what you want to know is, okay, we're all moving together on that. And I think that helps a lot. Once you have that, something that's earned, right? You have to have that trust with people. But I think that's a huge help on it. I think the other thing for me, when I think about the loneliness of a CEO, is it's linked to some extent by the awareness, right? One of the hardest things about being a leader, I think, is your awareness of everything. Your awareness of everything, and that almost overload of information and the responsibility to work your way through that. Of course, all the opportunities, but equally all of the headwinds, all of the challenges in your business, and more than anyone else, all of these things, and you're having to make decisions around this that you feel nobody else maybe has full visibility of that. And so constantly having that on you can be quite stressful, right? And it's not something that you can just talk to someone and say, here's the list of things that I know that are stressing me. And so how I try and approach this is that, well, you can't deal with all of them. Again, it's a reality. You're never going to overcome them. And so all you can do is always, and it comes back to how you think your business and thinking further ahead, is where are you trying to get to? And if you're consistent in making your decisions aligned with that, you're going to get some wrong. Things are going to go badly. Of course, that's it. But if you constantly come back to, am I moving forward towards one thing that I can at least aim towards, then let me focus on that and try and put everything else away. Easier said than done. I think anyone in these positions knows that you try and split your life. I can only imagine, right? Like for you as a founder, how difficult it must be to separate, your professional and personal on that. But no matter what, it's hard. These things constantly play in your mind.
And did you create your own? I mean, with founders, there are things like founders networks, like Rada mentioned. Did you find yourself reaching out to other CEOs and talking to them about things like that? Or is that just not something that's part of the culture outside of the founder-led kind of world?
So I was lucky enough, so a business I worked with before Gumtree actually had a lot of individuals in it who'd come from the Uber world, and a lot of people who actually left that business. It was a prop tech business, which actually in COVID folded and everyone left. So that's where I had been. Actually, I joined Gumtree just after COVID. Actually, I'd been with the previous company. And so what I found quite useful was within that network, speaking to some people there who had these kind of mindsets, were at that point often founding their own companies and having those challenges, and had come from, certainly anyone who's worked with anyone from Uber knows, very aggressive mindset and wartime mindset. So actually very useful kind of people to talk to and to have as a network during that period. So I lent, I guess, on my existing network of peers who I'd worked with in previous jobs.
I guess moving away from the focus on you as a CEO to your people, Rada, I'm coming to you because, as you said, you had to let go so many, almost all of your staff, and I know you've brought quite a lot of them back on again. When, maybe focusing on that period just after you had revitalised Flashpack, how do you get the best out of a workforce who might be weary, run down, fatigued, uncertain, have lost a bit of trust? How do you get around that? What's the best way to motivate people?
Yeah, and I think this is a common issue, right? So a lot of people are exhausted after COVID. So even if your business wasn't going through crisis and your business went through a growth period, you know, COVID did a real number on a lot of people. They're now dealing with lots and lots of issues, either with their family or personally, health issues. Just generally, people are exhausted, right, from that whole period. So I think this is relevant even to everyone. I personally think that exhaustion isn't just about, like, burnout isn't just about being tired and being exhausted. It's also about loneliness. And I think many people felt very, very lonely through COVID and lost a lot of social connection, lost a lot of friends, lost the ability, like developed a lot of social anxiety, like their social network and social lives have just massively reduced after COVID. And I think a lot of that is contributing to the fact that they're feeling burnt out, exhausted and lonely. And it has a massive impact on their well-being. So even if they're not suffering from, you know, issues like health issues from COVID, loneliness in itself has a massive impact on our well-being. In fact, the research says that obesity reduces your longevity by 20%, right? Drinking reduces it by 30%, smoking by like 50%, and loneliness affects your longevity, reduces it by 70%. It's massive, right? Like, it's huge. And what do lonely employees do? They disengage. Right, so it has a massive impact on the organisation, and disengagement leads to like 37% increase in absenteeism, sickness, 16% lower profits, and they say it leads to 65% lower share price overall. Right, so it's a massive issue. Productivity is a massive issue for companies. Obviously, human connection and friendship is a massive part of the Flashpack mission. So we do a lot of well-being programs, like how to reduce stress, that kind of thing. Like we have like a online, you know, Pilates class and all of that stuff. But we're really, really focused on creating friendship, trust, like warm connections, like friendly connections between our team, and creating that sense of community and really creating friendship, because we know that has a biggest impact on our productivity and performance levels of our company. So we are a fully remote and fully distributed team post-COVID, but we invest quite heavily in bringing the entire team from the US, from Australia, UK together once a year. We have UK socials in America, and then we do a lot of virtual online, just connecting over coffees, connecting over like social games online as well.
And Hugh, I'd love to hear about how you went about motivating the Gumtree workforce after this huge upheaval.
Yeah, it's a challenge, as Radha says, that connection with people, and the fact that you're now having to do this in a world where hybrid is the norm, where hybrid or remote is the norm, right? You can't lean on that natural connections that comes from being in an office, and so you have to be far more proactive, and it's certainly something I think that any leaders are now much more thinking about, because they're seeing the impacts on your business, on people, and how important it is. I think what we try and do, and so for context, where half of our business, our product and tech, is primarily remote, and the remainder is hybrid. So we do have to some extent an office culture, although it's a few days a week. Again, it's that in-person. We try and drive in-person connections, and we do large events. Of course, you know, we come together as the entire company. But a big thing we try and push is again creating some norms around socializing together and engaging together, about making it less of events and more like a natural connections that people can come together. And we find that, you know, I can map the energy in our business from people, you know, the increase that's been there from the point we started this just over a year again, and really investing and trying to create these moments that people come together, get energy from talking, create connections, and then of course you see that work through a distributed workforce, that they know each other better within that. I think another thing, a big passion, something we had to do within our business to try and, you know, motivate and energize people again is after that massive push of our TSAs and that big work, to TSAs being all of the projects we had to do to stand up, is to some extent taking a pause. Sometimes you need to know when to just take some sort of a pause, not, you know, that work or anything, but to realize you can't drive at really fast, aggressive pace, long term. It's not sustainable. Regardless of anything else, you will just burn people out and they will leave and you will have to replace and you will continue to burn. So a period of normal is a good thing. You may feel frustrated, you're not operating as fast as you might like, but actually longer term, it's super, super important to just have an opportunity for people to reset slightly on it. The last thing that we lean heavily on, I think, and a lot of businesses do, right, is when you're a business like Gumtree with a strong mission, right, with a product that people, resonates with them, they feel it's doing good, we're connecting people, we're giving people value, we're giving people the opportunity, to upcycle, re-commerce, etc. That when people believe that our mission is good and it's core to what we are, it's not a fake mission, right, this is the core of what Gumtree is, that helps, right? That certainly helps when you're asking people to go the extra mile when what you're doing, people inherently believe in, that helps. And we know that. And that's why our mission and our purpose is something, when we became an independent company, we spent time really making sure it was true to us. And it's something we always turn back to and say, this is why we're doing what we're doing. And we're asking people, to go that extra mile when we do ask.
Throwing this to both of you, so whoever can jump in as they see fit. Did you notice that you needed different types of people, different types of talent to get you through the difficult period, who you then had to make a decision to part ways with because they were, in a way, more wartime employees than peacetime employees? Or was that not really the case?
No, that wasn't the case for us. So we had, when COVID hit, we put everyone on furlough except a team of 15 people who we called the Lights On team. And that was really based on what tasks need to be done. And in this case, it was repatriating customers, all customer service stuff, and who are the best people to kind of perform those tasks and who are the most resilient, because it was really tough. The customers were really angry. And so we just chose it on that basis. And then what we found is those people were extremely trained, right? They'd learned skills, incredible skills that they would never have learned in any other scenario. So they were, their kind of learning curve was huge, and that was very relevant to business.
Yeah, I think maybe a bit different, Russ, in that, yes, we did in a very practical sense, and that we hired huge amounts of contractors and project managers in order to execute against it. But we scaled up our entire business during this period with contractors, project teams, etc., which then in many cases, well, in all cases, of course, we then finished the contracts with. What we found more maybe was that, I know it's not quite your question, but it is more of a shift for us, maybe in being part of a big organization to being an independent company. And it's a big shift because eBay is huge and Gumtree is not a huge organization. We're about 100, full-time employees. And that's a very different mindset of responsibility, of ownership, of risk-taking, of moving faster. And it's natural. Some people like the bigger organizations and some people like smaller organizations with more risk, but equally, in sometimes more opportunity. So we saw a kind of a natural shift occurred there. We spoke at the start, some people just, it wasn't for them when we were there, and so they moved out. And certainly as we hire now, we hire in a slightly different, it's that mindset of coming from, we hope, more growth and smaller businesses with that more, risk-taking attitude and wanting to make more impact faster.
And going through crisis, there's just as much managing up as there is managing down. And I know you both have interesting experiences with investors and shareholders. What kind of advice would you give to leaders who are engaging with those investors or boards during these periods of challenge?
Yeah, so for me, I would say just be transparent, right? Good news travels fast, bad news should travel faster. That your board should not feel like they're being blindsided. You should keep them abreast of the decisions you're making, why you're making them. And they'll be, if you communicate to them early, they'll be more likely to trust and support you, rather than making life difficult for you. And I can't express that strongly enough, right? And even now, I make sure our board feel that they know the good times, and we're sharing all the good news, but we're also sharing bad news, just as much.
Yeah, I think transparency with your board is key, right? One thing which I think we certainly learned from I learned, and I say we, Gumtree, as a business, learned working with the board through our, the carve-out period, was being transparent, and in particular about, what you're not doing, maybe. And sometimes people fill in the gaps about, you say you're doing something and they imagine maybe something else. And so being super clear, especially when you're doing large investments, what the perimeters of these investments are, what the clear scope of it is, so you don't come to the end and think, oh, we've delivered on this, and then your board says, oh, well, actually, we thought this was more, or something else was going to be achieved here. And that's something that I think it works not just with boards, but in anywhere, being super clear about these things, I think is super important. Another thing which I think was a consequence of the pace we were moving at the time, but I can see the follow-on impacts, is coming to a board with kind of a decisions where there's really only one, and saying, we have to do this. This is the only choice we have. Time is out. This is going to cost. We have to do this. It never really works out because the board is not invested in it, right? They feel like they were somehow, forced into this decision. And when things start to go wrong, it's very hard, to re-engage and have the board support, like you spoke about there, rather with you on making that decision. You can't always do it, but going with only one option and saying we have to do this is really not a good idea. And so always trying to work in advance. It's early communication. It's not just waiting until the board meeting, and trying to give those options, bring people on the journey, will make a big difference down the line.
Yeah, nobody likes an ultimatum.
Yeah, don't wait for the board meeting, make sure you're having conversations. So by the time you get to the board meeting, everybody's abreast of what's happening. Everyone's in the loop, and it's a productive meeting. And, you're having those conversations individually and giving everyone the time to ask their own questions and understand kind of your perspective.
We have got lots of very good questions that have come in, so I'm going to move over to some questions from the audience. We've got one here from Ollie who says, how have you all changed as CEOs since going through crises, and what attributes do you think the best modern CEOs must have compared to perhaps 5 years ago?
Oh, great question. I honestly, I've got to a point now the company is kind of massively thriving again. We're back to like 90 people and growing. I have to say, I've got to a point now where I am actually grateful for COVID. It taught me how to be a CEO, how to do both sides of those roles, right? Be peacetime, collaborative leader, and how to be a wartime CEO. And it made me so strong, and I feel almost unflappable now. And I have to, I'm still human, so I still get stressed about things, but I always remind myself that all growth problems are good problems. And as long as it's not COVID, it's a good problem. So yeah, I've definitely, it changed me completely, and I feel the companies now, I feel like a second time founder. I feel like Flashpack is so much stronger because of it. The oscillations between the ups and the downs are kind of less pronounced. I feel like it's more steady, creates a lot of stability for the team. I don't feel like I'm winging it. I feel like I actually know what I'm doing. So yeah, I'm grateful for that. I think I'll hand over to you, Hugh, while I think about the attributes question.
Certainly learned a lot through this. I think the biggest thing that I think about learning, and then maybe one of the, probably leads directly into the attribute that I think is one of the most important, is striking that balance between when to just make your decision, and be the single decision maker, versus allowing for consensus and delegated decision making down. There is a time for both, and of course, I think it's well known. You need diversity of opinion. You need to, it's far more powerful to have people, providing alternative opinions and listening, and as a CEO, being fully open to changing your mind. That's super important. But knowing when to stop the discussions and move forward, I think is very important. And in when I think to our times of the carve-outs, that was short. It was, what are the facts? We make decision now. Whereas in other times, it's okay. Allow people to experiment, to own the decisions more. It gives you more insight, informs them in a better way, and then making decisions and pushing forward. And so where you draw that line, I think is always something to think about, and depends on the context you're in about when to do it, and something to be aware of, I guess.
I've got, oh, sorry. On you go, Radha.
No, just really quickly, I think on the attributes thing, I think for me, one of the most important attributes is, it sounds a bit boring, but resource allocation. I think, the 5 years ago, growth at all costs was like the strategy, and like just grow, be the biggest, be the fastest, be the number one. And although that's still important and growth is still really important to us as Flashback, I think resource allocation and having like a sustainable growth strategy is like it far outweighs growth now, you know, and trying to make both those things, growth and sustainable growth, work at the same time is hugely important. Knowing all the levers in your business, how to pull them, how to get to profitability, like you know, it's, if you don't have that ability and you don't have that knowledge in your business, you're going to struggle, because the money is not flowing like it used to back in 2019.
We've got another really great question here from Lee, who said, what are you doing to prepare or future-proof your business for future crises?
Yeah, maybe I can. One thing we've worked heavily on is almost, this sounds very straightforward, but documenting knowledge in our business. Again, I'm talking now in very practical terms. And so something we found as we came into the last crisis is there were pockets of unknown, whether or not technology, processes, parts of our business, that we just had to scramble to understand how it was impacting, how it interplayed in other areas. And so having gone through effectively rebuilding our business, that knowledge exists, but it exists in a lot of cases still with individuals. This is how you lose all the knowledge purely over time in an organization. So trying to capture and document in a clear way this, and having proper processes to maintain this, whether it's from a technology perspective, from a commercial strategy perspective, opportunity perspective. And I think with that, it will allow us in future, you know, crisis, of which I hope there won't be many, at least to react faster and have a better, you know, foundation in which to then make our decisions on top of. So that's definitely one thing which we lacked last time, and I hope next time we're in a much better position.
For me, it's about cash. So we are a cash generative business. We obviously bootstrapped in Flashpack 1.0, and, you know, we're bootstrapping like 300% growth at some points. That we can do it. However, I will never bootstrap the business again. Like, oh God, never bootstrap a high growth business. We are firmly VC backed. We have amazing funders. We have a massive £50 billion fund behind us, so that if anything like that happened again, I've got somebody to turn to. And, you know, it helps me sleep much easier at night. We have cash reserves now. So if anything happens, as a travel company, you're always vulnerable to macro risks, right? We've got 2 wars raging. We had the Morocco earthquake last year in Q4, and you know, it just wiped out our kind of top performing trips in one go. So we're always vulnerable, and now with cash in the bank, I could just sleep easier at the night knowing that we can weather some of these storms.
I've got a little question of my own, and then I will come back to audience questions, I promise. But just hearing you both talk, obviously no CEO is a fortune teller, sadly. What is one crisis you think is likely to come up? I mean, there's so many forces buffeting business at the moment. Radha, you mentioned wars, climate crisis, macroeconomic uncertainty. We had Brexit, we've had all sorts. What have you got in your sights that you think must be prepared for that, because it's possible?
Gosh, we've had so many, haven't we? I'm expecting more wars. Climate issues as a travel company, you know, we've just had a hurricane in Belize. Like, there's a protest in Kenya. Bolivia's kicking off. Like, there's a lot of uncertainty right now, like political uncertainty plus climate change uncertainty that will affect us all the time. The way we mitigate that is we have a global portfolio of trips that you can go to, and, you know, we can move customers around. We have a global audience. We have customers in America and UK, so we feel like we mitigate by being, you know, our exposure is not kind of in one region. But apart from that, I think inflation is going to still be an issue for a while. The cost of living crisis is going to, you know, people's savings, even if you did save during COVID, you know, savings have been depleted massively. I think that is going to affect consumer businesses for quite some time.
Yeah, for us, I mean, there's of course macro, and I'm concerned, you know, competitors coming in, and the big competitors, heavily financed competitors, and challenging our market position. I mean, if I'm fully honest, the biggest kind of crisis that I think might hit a country or a similar business, a classifieds business, is it's around a safety, right? I mean, if you think about it, I remember I used to work in the nuclear industry, and everyone used to say every day, hey, one day there could be a nuclear reactor and we're all done, right? If there's something, we're all done. It's outside of our control, but it could happen. And something in classifieds, historically, safety was not front of mind, right? And it was it was at risk. Some marketplaces today, if you think about the Facebook marketplaces, etc., don't invest heavily in it, and we see large amounts of fraud. But something we do, like we invest heavily to moderate, to understand, to control, work with police, etc. on that. But that risk never goes to zero. That risk never goes to zero. It's a reality of having a product that involves face-to-face. And so if we think about tail risks that could cause crises, that is one which would be a very difficult event, obviously, for whatever happened, and also for our business. So that's one that would be there.
This is sort of piggybacking off a question we have had, but Petra asked about whether you had a business continuity plan coming into your particular crisis. Did you think it helped? And if not, or if it did, have you got a different one now?
Yeah, being part of eBay, there was a business continuity plan. As you can imagine, a massive organization picks someone and says, build this business continuity plan. So you tick a box somewhere and says that it's there. So I can say it was not particularly useful in that it dealt with very generic risks, I would say. And so it's hard, I would say. We certainly didn't have a specific tool set that said how you carve out your entire business from this world, because it was entirely built upon being within that organization. I always think business continuity plans and risk registers, etc., are good exercises in order to get you thinking, driving, even driving your whole planning process right. A lot of that is within the planning process. But to the extent you're going to manage large tail risk crises, I don't know. I don't have enough experience of that. But certainly the one we had was not one that we lifted and said, great, this is what we go with now.
So ironically, we did start in 2019, late 2019, around the generalised risk, like something happens to the founders, that kind of thing. COVID was not on that risk register. and so I can firmly say, no, it didn't, it had no bearing on how we dealt with COVID. I mean, it was so unprecedented, right? But now we would know how to deal with another, crisis like that. So, when... And just nobody saw COVID coming, right? Generalized risks, absolutely. But it's a whole new world. Now we all know how to deal with a massive global crisis.
How often do you do a kind of risk register now?
Review it. We review it like once a year, I would say.
And Hugh?
Yeah, I would say similar. Actually, we're in the process of doing it, so it's front of mind. But yeah, I think it would be annual. That's it.
Cool. Well, CEOs, you heard that. I have got just one more question from the audience, from Elle, who says, I haven't heard anyone mention having a coach as part of their support team, which surprises me. Do either of you have a coach? And if not, why not?
I did have a coach. I don't have one at the moment, but I believe they're crucial. Like a CEO mentor or CEO coach is crucial. But I don't have one yet. So if anyone's got any recommendations, I'd happily take some. But I did have one when we relaunched Flashpack. My mental health was there was a lot of trauma I needed to process from the business going into administration. And I had one briefly in Flashpack 1.0 as well.
Yeah, it's a good question. I think about, I don't have a coach, and I've never really had a formal coach in that sense. On the flip side, I've lent heavily on people either have been direct managers or in organizations and learned from them, right? And so I haven't felt a specific gap in that. I've always, where I've worked, I've been lucky enough to have people that say, okay, some of those attributes I want to learn, not all, but some, and equally, proactively thinking those are good things, those are not good things. And then there is informal networks, that we talk with. Again, I'm sure many people have these, but of founders or CEOs or people who kind of bounce ideas off. But as a formal coach, no. But certainly something I think about.
And I just want to finish the whole session by asking if you could go back and give a piece of advice to pre-crisis you, from the standpoint of post-crisis you, in terms of resilience, mental health, getting through it. What piece of advice would you give to help them go through that, and that might help other CEOs?
I think the biggest piece of advice I would have given myself is cut hard and cut fast. Don't delay. I didn't. You know, at the time, we thought, okay, yeah, we just need to cut a bit of fat, you know. And then within 24 hours, 48 hours, thinking, no, we need to cut more, like we need to cut some flesh. And then you realise you've got to like get right down to the bone, right? And I don't think I made those decisions like quickly enough. I was glad I waited for furlough. Like I didn't do the knee-jerk reaction and make everyone redundant. There was a gut instinct, and you know, waited. We just held costs for 3 weeks of the entire team, and then furlough came out, which was a massive relief. We put everyone on furlough, so I don't regret that. But I think I could have made better decisions on cutting costs quicker. I mean, I don't think the end result would have been much different, but I think that's the advice I would give other CEOs. Like if you're going through crisis, if you're going through a turnaround situation, like nothing matters. You know, that brand project, that, you know, that tech project, like nothing matters if your business doesn't survive. Like, so just cut it all.
And Hugh?
Yeah, I would say the one thing I always think back and reflect on is sometimes, and it's a bit different because again, we weren't dealing with the crisis of the moment. We were dealing with like a deadline, like very aggressive deadlines and very large projects, and so the here and now, day to day, was a bit different. And so what we didn't do maybe enough of, and I would give advice, is sometimes delaying that early decision. Sometimes we rushed into them too fast, and the consequence down the line at the end is much greater than that 1 or 2 weeks delay than we would have had up front to say, we know we're under incredible pressure. We know we need to make decisions, but actually, are we fully sure? Let's think about this a little longer because this is a big project and this is going to live with us long after. And so a little bit more thought up front, even though it's hard in the moment to do, I think would have saved us more down at the end. But that again is more dealt with when some pressures around big projects.
So it's all about timing. Don't be too quick and don't be too slow.
I realise this is the opposite.
All I can say is thank goodness I'm not a CEO. It sounds very stressful. But yes, thank you so much to both of you for your time. I'm sorry we lost Catherine to Wigan and the cinema. If you would like to learn more about Catherine and how she steered Pearl and Dean through its crisis, there is an interview with her on raconteur.net. Please go and have a read of it. And yeah, I hope you have all enjoyed, and I've definitely learned a lot. So thank you so much for your time.